Hello everyone, what's up guys? We're back with round 8 of the Lebanese Chess Championship. And what a what a round it was, and what a tight race for the finish it is. Here we have Amr winning his game, very important for him, as now he's on 7 out of 8, which almost assures him tournament victory, but no. Some other results made sure that Amr wouldn't clinch the tournament in round 8. So we need to see what happened in round 9 to see whether or not Amr was able to win the tournament. And yeah, so he was playing here Ralph, who had an amazing performance. He scored, he was, I think, in second place after round 7 finished. And yeah, definitely not, Ralph isn't a 1700, guys, so keep that in mind. And the reason, of course, why we're so underrated in Lebanon is because there are a few tournaments, and like with COVID and the economic crisis, it got even worse. So even before that, there weren't that many tournaments, and with COVID and the economic crisis, yeah. So okay, knight of 3, knight c6, and now Ralph goes for bishop b5. Now Ralph is usually an open Sicilian player, but he's mixing it up, and especially in this tournament, he's mixed it up, and it worked quite well. If you guys remember the game against Surso he played, where he won a very, very nice game, which we covered. He played also the closed Sicilian. Well, this is the Rosselimo, but you know, I mean the non-open Sicilian. Okay, so d6. Very normal move, and now Ralph's argument here, or the main argument of this opening, the Rosarimo, is that you lose the bishop pair. Yes, that's true, but you get these doubled pawns in return, and you try to play around them and prove that they're a weakness. Castles, e5. e5 is a very natural move, trying to control d4 and just gaining a foothold in the center. c3, preparing d4, trying to loosen black's grip over the d4 square. And now f5. A very enterprising move, which just aims to imbalance the position, thereby creating winning chances for black. Now against f5, usually these kinds of moves like f5 and sometimes c5, you usually, like c5 for example, you usually meet it with e4. f5 you usually meet it with d4. Very, very nice move here in this position, and we'll see why this works. By the way, instead of f5, more normal moves like knight f6 or bishop g4 can be tried. I think if we check the opening book, knight f6, this is the master's database. So knight f6 is the most common, bishop g4 is the third most common, and f5 is the second most common. But anyway, Amr clearly wants to win this game, so he goes for f5. And yeah, so the usual response is d4. C takes is natural. We can check why f takes, for example, isn't so great, because of simply knight g5 and you recover the pawn, and all of these recaptures you're in time to meet them. And this sometimes creates these kinds of threats in certain positions, this move. So this is a good move. And of course you can't play h6, because then this is just GG. So something to keep in mind here. Of course here white isn't winning. White is only slightly better in this position, but more accurate is simply to take, more accurate for black. And after white recaptures, you take here, and now knight g5 promises white a healthy long-term advantage. Instead, Ralph met f5 with e takes f5, which is just simply like, it's not wrong, but the intended follow-up is wrong. So here after bishop e7, here you still have to play d4, so you're just delaying d4 in a sense. And after, let's say, c takes, e4, trying to kick away the knight, you go knight fd2, attack this knight. You can also go knight g5, but this is kind of sidelining the knight, though maybe this is possible and this is possible. The point, of course, is that after you take here, seemingly winning the knight, you have this check and you can pick up the bishop and just trade. And these kinds of trades, I guess, favor white ever so slightly, but there is nothing in the position, and this is just very drawish. If after d4, though, black goes for the immediate e4, which is also interesting, you go knight fd2, black captures the pawn, And now d takes c5 is very strong, trying to ruin black's pawn structure. I'm surprised I got it right the first time around. So ruining black's pawn structure. d5, knight b3, and now knight d4 is possible, and white is doing well. And if instead of d takes c5, which I find to be the better move, f3 is also possible. I'm trying to open up for the rook and maybe some of these ideas. Of course, you can't really push because of knight c4 and you'll pick up this pawn. And of course, you also have the idea of taking, like this is the main idea, taking and not only opening up for the rook but also getting a strong center. So d4 is still good here, but Ralph now makes the mistake here of playing rook e1. So that's why I basically didn't really like e takes f5, even though technically it's not wrong. But the intended follow-up is just to play d4 anyway, so why not play d4 in the first place and keep the tension and make black think more. When you play e takes f5 and then follow up with d4, you're limiting black's options and thereby limiting the chances for black to go wrong. So, rook e1, and now this very normal bishop takes f5, d4, and now quite simply you just takes, e4, knight fd2, d5. And you have none of the other problems you had in the previous lines. If we check the previous lines, for example, in the previous line here, you had to take, and now takes, and if you play d5, which is the main line, you just go knight b3. And here if takes, knight, and now knight fd2. If something like bishop f5 happens, again you have the possibility of f3, or even I'm thinking maybe about the sacrifice d5, but no, that's not really necessary. So you had these options here, but the difference here is that after c takes, e4, knight fd2, quite simply you're down a tempo, and now something like f3, because the rook is no longer on f1, it makes way less sense. So after f3 you have to recapture with the knight, and yeah, okay, black is just too quick. So Amr, surprisingly, and well, he went by according to some chess principles, which is like your king is in the center, white is castled, so you need to close down the position. But the thing is, he just allowed a simple tactic. Well, not simple, but a tactic. So again, instead, just trading the pawn would have not allowed this tactic. So why is e4 wrong? Not for any deep strategic reasons, but because it allows this tactic. So you could have closed down the position later, but I can understand why Amr was very quick to close down the position, because it's very scary to play with this king here. So the point here is that d takes c5 is a good tactic. Not automatically, like after e4, you don't automatically move the knight away, no. You take, after e4, you take the pawn, and the point is that if this happens, you can play this. And thanks to the pin, you're going to recover the piece. I was also wondering if queen takes f3 is possible with some of the same ideas, but it's not really necessary. Just play c takes d6 here, and you're recovering the piece, of course, because of the pin. Black can't capture here. So you're recovering the piece with interest, because the attack rages on. So of course, d5 needs to be played to keep the position closed. By the way, if d takes c5, then you have knight e5, and oh yeah, yeah, I was thinking why this line. So d takes c5 is actually the engine recommendation, but I think it's a terrible move. I would label it as double exclamation marks if I could, but like technically speaking, okay, it's maybe the better move than playing d5, which is what Amr played and I annotated as a good move. D takes c5 maybe the slightly better move engine wise, but like it's completely losing in human terms, because you're liquidating, you're allowing the queen trade, and here the best result black can hope for is a draw. Now okay, maybe the engine can hold the draw in this position, though I doubt that, but as a human being, you're almost never going to win this position as black. So Amr made the right decision after blundering, especially seeing the rating difference, even though again Ralph isn't rated 1700, of course, but I mean that's what it is on paper. So he needs to play better so as to not lose so much rating if he draws or even loses the game. So Amr played the enterprising, well, not really the enterprising, but the slower d5, which keeps the queens on the board and locks down the position when your king is in the center. So I very much like this move. Knight d4, of course, very natural, attacking the bishop, getting the knight to a better square, and getting the knight out of dodge. Queen d7, good move also, just protecting the bishop. And now queen a4. This is the start of a wrong approach by Ralph, in fact, because now he starts shifting the pieces away from the king side, and he doesn't really acknowledge the fact that black actually has a reasonable king side attack, which we will see in a moment. So here he had to play b4 and just keep the pawn like this. No reason to be fancy, play queen a4 trying to attack c6 and like counter attack. Just protect the extra pawn on c5. And yeah, and you have this plan of playing first of all bishop f4, just controlling the diagonal and defending the king side, which is very important, as we will see. Not playing bishop f4 was kind of Ralph's downfall. And you have this plan of playing the typical Ruy Lopez plan of playing knight d2, knight f1, knight e3, getting the knight to the powerful square where it also helps control e5 and adds support to the g2 square, thereby also reducing the power of black's attack. So remember here, black's attack due to the open f file is actually very, very strong. So you need to just stifle it, and you'll be on your way to win as white, or at least get a very good position. So instead queen a4, which I don't really like, rook c8, just defending c6, b4, which is the move that should have been played instead of queen a4, knight f6, preparing castling, knight d2, also developing. Again here, for example, maybe developing the bishop first was kind of better, but knight d2 is fine, castles, and now the game losing, knight 2 b3. What are the pieces doing there? It's so wrong. Like in principle, you have all of these pieces here, like the possibility of this, which is what happened in the game, etc. And you have zero kingside defenders, and like the rook isn't even on f1 to defend, so that proved to be Ralph's downfall in this game. In fact, here black is much better already. Here knight f1, protecting h2 and trying to just defend this way would have been far better and would have kept white's advantage. Knight 2 b3 is just basically losing. Knight g4, very smart. Now I don't blame Ralph for not seeing it concretely, because concretely it's very difficult to see like how Amr breaks through, and we'll see how he did that in brilliant fashion in just a second. If you notice also on these games, Amr has been playing very aggressively, like the game against Joe, the game against Akram, this game against Ralph. Super aggressive chess, just phenomenal actually. So yeah, it's difficult to see in concrete terms, but just going by chess principles, you put your queen on a4, you put your knight on b3, you're just putting your pieces on the wrong squares, you're putting them on the queen side, while the attack is really on the king side. Actually, because of the mirror effect, okay, I have to say the king side and the queen side. Yeah, so that was the wrong approach. And now let's see how Amr brilliantly converts. Knight g4, starting to threaten these kind of thingamajigs. Knight a5, just losing the game on the spot. Maybe like you could have played bishop e3 here, but of course black is winning anyway, or much better at least. And now the brilliant bishop h4, adding more pressure here, and seemingly running into g3, but now bazunga, knight takes f2. And Ralph was very cooperative here, though of course other defenses don't work. Bishop e3 also would have kept the game going, but after queen f7, white is just lost. These pieces are not coming back quickly enough. But at least this would have made Amr think a bit more. Yeah, so we went for g3, but now it comes knight takes f2. Of course, if you don't take the knight, hello and goodbye. So king takes, bishop check, you go back. Of course, running up is just like, do I really need to analyze this? So bishop takes g3, brilliant sacrifice. I should annotate this with a, yeah, maybe just a good move because it's the right follow-up. Bishop e3 and bishop takes e1, and it's actually game over. There's no way to stop queen g4 with queen g2 mate. Notice that the rook also is blocking the king from escaping. And here notice that if you take also queen g4 and the king is just stuck, there's no way. Even if the queen comes here, you're not really helping, you just get checkmated. So very nice game by Amr. Actually Amr blundered in the opening, but yeah, Ralph couldn't convert because he really underestimated black's attack and played wrong, at least in principle. Played wrongly in principle. So tough loss for Ralph, but yeah, okay, it happens. What can you do? Okay, let's go for Mahdi against Gio. This was a rather topsy-turvy game, and one where like the natural moves aren't good basically. So let's see what this was about. So c4, e5, standard well, not really anti-English, but the standard response to get an advantage against the English. Not an advantage, but to get a game against the English. To play enterprisingly against the English, try to go for one. Okay, e3, and now d6, which is a possibility in the other line where black plays d3, but against e3 this is a weak move because obviously you're just running into d4 eventually, and that's what happened. Here you have the possibility of going for d5, which is basically a pawn sacrifice which you later recover. C takes, seemingly you're winning a pawn, but now comes knight b4, and the key is this square, so you never want to allow this check as white. So here you have d4, attacking the bishop and stopping this check because of the queen. Takes, and now bishop e7, knight e2, normal development, and the pawn is just lost. There is no real way to recover because there are too many pieces attacking it. If you go, for example, with queen b3, again you allow knight d3 check. So d5 was of course, like in this position, white retains a very small edge, but black is fine. So d6 isn't the most accurate move theoretically speaking because of this d4 break. So you only play d6 when white plays d3. Okay, knight ge2, preparing d4, castles, a6, giving room for the bishop, which is a very good move. And now a3, not really an approach I like, because you're going to be combining b4 with d4, which seems fine in principle, but it creates some weaknesses on these light squares. I much prefer the more natural b3, which not threatens, but okay, it which aims to fianchetto the dark squared bishop and just push through d4, and you don't get the same kinds of weaknesses, or yeah, like you get different kinds of weaknesses, of course, for example on a3, but these are better than having this, which looks so bad on these squares, right? So yeah, okay, knight e7, relocating the knight perhaps to g6 and preparing some of these ideas. In general, I like this move in these structures, but perhaps here just getting the bishop out of the way of d4 was more warranted, because here you're allowing b4 and then d4. You could of course switch up the move order, play d4 first then b4, but that doesn't make much of a difference or any difference. c6 and now c5. This is like trying to severely restrict the black bishop, basically just trap the bishop or make it immobile, but like better was just to leave it be on this square, and just maybe play bishop b2 or something, or h3 to prevent any of these moves. Like keep the position as is. Or maybe actually, yeah, this is probably even better than bishop b2 and h3. Just taking and then playing queen c2 and rook d1, and you should have a small advantage there. Or reasonable, like between a small and reasonable advantage. Instead, c5, okay, blocks the bishop but cedes control of d5, and like the bishop isn't going to be too sad going here, which is what happened in the game. E takes, smart to include this because at any point this can be a problem. Taking here and then taking here, liquidating the center to white's advantage. E takes back, and now d5, immediately trying to go for this bishop b8 idea, and I understand Gio's fear here of this bishop being forevermore trapped. But here you can just play h6 to restrict this bishop, and we'll see why this is very important in a second, and then play bishop b8, and then you don't really need to play d5 because you keep the d5 square for your pieces, and if ever a recapture happens, then you're able to develop your bishop, and white doesn't have any clear plan to go for. And by the way, that's why it's important to include h6, because if you play bishop b8 immediately, then comes bishop g5, harassing this knight and giving white a good position. Like after knight g6, there's knight e4 making use of the pin. So that's not desirable. So the problem with white's approach in playing c5 is that they give up the d5 square, and d5 is just kind of helping justify white's play. But okay, it's still reasonable for black. Bishop g5, good move. Knight g6. Knight f5 was also possible. Knight g6 maybe isn't best. Knight f5 offers at least a solid attack on the d4 square, and it's not clear to see, like, this knight could be annoying in some lines coming to these squares, and actually these kinds of sacrifices do occur in the game, so we'll see that in a second or a few minutes. Yeah, but yeah, the knight here is doing a good job, and it's not easy to see how white will be able to dislodge it. So instead, knight g6, a4 is a good move, threatening this kind of stuff. h6, never too late, but maybe just going bishop b8 first was better. Taking b5 in line with the plan. Bishop f5, okay, reasonable developing move. There are other moves, but no need to go into that. And now b6 is a good move. Finally, like shutting down this rook, which was Mahdi's plan. And here white had the brilliant queen d2, which is honestly an engine recommended move. I didn't really think of that. The point being to replace, like, this knight on c3. It's not really doing much now, or at all. It's not doing much at all. So you relocate it to e3, where at least it controls the f5 square and helps support the king side. Instead, Mahdi went for another approach, which is to improve the position of the e2 knight, which is also understandable, of course. Knight c1, h5, and now knight b3. Kind of like, okay, you're developing d4 more, but like the knight here, it's a bit sidelined on the queen side. Black will try to develop their play on the king side. Their bishop, while potentially being trapped, it does have some scope. So what you need to do is make sure that this rook never comes out, this bishop stays here. So you need to do that by just holding everything on the king side, and when black doesn't have enough pieces on the king side, you break through from the center. So h4 here, knight a5, just attacking the pawn. Bishop c8, forcing the defense. So that's why, like, bishop f5, maybe there were better moves there, but yeah, because you lose control of b7. Okay, and now rook e1. Perhaps knight e2 here was better, and it's important to defend g3, and we'll see why in a second. Rook e1, and now knight e7. Just really jostling for squares. There aren't really many good plans for black, so I don't blame Gio for going for this move. But in fact, there was a stupendously brilliant sacrifice, which of course, like, I don't expect even super GMs to find this move here. Knight f4. Of course, maybe you think about it because of this, but yeah, you need to assess what happens after, and that's not easy at all. So what happens after g takes f4, queen takes, king f1. Here, obviously pushing the bishop to restrict it, bishop f3, and now queen g5, and you have rook e8, bishop f4, bishop f5, queen h5, the bishop from f4 going to g5, then f6, attacking d4. All of these ideas come into mind. So this is a very long-term sacrifice, also having to do with the fact that these knights aren't really doing much. Of course, this knight is attacking b7, but you argue that with the king so precariously placed, you have good chances here as black to at least go for a murky game. Now, white of course remains better here, but at least it's very murky. So instead, white shouldn't accept the sacrifice and just go knight e2, which is also very strange because you'd think, oh my god, losing the bishop pair. So knight takes g2, king takes g2, but now you have the brilliant rook a3, developing your rook and protecting the king side at the same time and developing it to f3, so all is good. Of course, you don't develop to f3, by the way, because there are h3 check or bishop h3 checks, which you need to be careful of. So we play knight g1 first, protecting the f3 square, protecting the h3 square, and giving your queen some scope on the queen side, on the king side. So this would be a good move. h3 check though, stopping knight g1, king g1, queen f3, threatening mate. But now comes knight f4, and you're able to trade queens. You're not really afraid of this because then you have a solid grip on the dark squares, and then you'd be left with this minor piece battle where obviously the knight is much better than the bishop. Note that all of the pawns are on light squares, only one isn't basically, and that's very disadvantageous for black. So knight takes g2 isn't great. And after knight e2 there's knight e6, adding pressure here, but then comes rook a3 again with the same rook f3 ideas, or even rook e3, and going from there. White is slightly better, but black has some chances to hold, or so black has some chances to hold. After knight e2, another move you have to consider is just taking, and here is the really crazy part, actually rather insane. The only way forward after knight takes e2 check is rook takes e2, because queen takes e2, like after knight takes e2 check, queen takes e2, queen takes d4 just picks up a pawn, and maybe a second is on the way. White is still actually fine because of this very solid grip on the queen side, but definitely no more than that. So the way to win is playing rook takes e2, just getting into the spin, which is insane. Bishop g4, and now rook a2, threatening to go out of the pin, or at least queen d3 to go out of the pin to remain in control of d4. And if it's captured, rook takes e2, and the point here is that you left control over b7. There is actually no way to defend the b7 square, and you have very solid control with your light squared bishop, while this dark squared bishop has 0 squares. And why was the position better with more pieces? Because when the dark squared bishop had 0 squares, it was actually attacking something. Like there was the potential of a kingside attack with the knight, with the bishop. But now with these pieces gone, this bishop is just doing nothing, this rook is doing nothing, and with your light squared bishop you'll have a very fun time picking up also like the other pawns. So this position is actually winning for white, or very much better. So yeah, rather surprising. So after knight f4 you have to see that knight e2, all of these knights. It's actually rather insane. It's insane for both sides, for the black side to consider the sacrifice, this long-term sacrifice, and for the white side to find the basically quote-unquote refutation. So knight e7 is a very reasonable move. Of course, white now has easy ways to add pressure, but actually he doesn't find best way to add pressure. He plays queen d3, which is fine, but really runs into bishop f5 ideas, which wasn't played because of various reasons actually. Bishop f5, for example, it may later run into tactics, for example, after these kinds of ideas. And in principle, putting the bishop here isn't really adding much, because of course the b7 square is well, it's not loose. The b7 pawn is hanging, not the square. So the bishop f5 seems very natural here, but it wasn't played because it just loosens the grip over b7. And there are some of these tactical ideas. Well, not here actually. Queen f3, rook takes e7, and then following up with this. So very smart of G not to play that. But anyway, my point here was queen d3 wasn't the best. Instead here, after knight e7, white should have played queen f3. Now of course this doesn't work because of this. Just saw that now, so thought I'd mention it. And if queen takes f3, bishop takes f3, and knight f5, you just protect the d4 pawn. King h8 actually illustrates a rather nice point here. You have knight takes d5, and with these passed pawns you're basically winning. Well, not basically, you're completely winning. So this, of course, king h8 isn't forced or anything, but this illustrates what the threat is. And for example, like protecting against this threat makes black lose. So white is basically winning here. So if knight f5 instead, trying to avoid the queen trade, then comes bishop h3, adding pressure to these points. For example, you might take to just remove a defender over f5, over b7, and that's actually the threat. If you notice here, also if bishop takes, queen takes, then you just take back, and then you can pick up b7, so that's the threat. So if knight takes d4 instead, you go queen takes f6, takes, and now taking the bishop. And here, instead of capturing and allowing the bishop to breathe, you play the brilliant f4. What happens after the natural knight f3, you might be asking? You just go up, takes, and look at this. This bishop, 0 squares. This rook, 0 squares. This rook ain't really having fun, right? So white is completely winning. Well, actually they're much better because of bishop c7. Trying to sacrifice the bishop with interest. You can accept it and you cannot, but like if you don't accept it, you just run into some of this stuff. So you accept it. And now comes knight b3. And in this position, white has the two minor pieces and very strong queenside pawns. And these pawns are like trash, of course. Well, not necessarily this, but these pawns, especially in the endgame with these squares being available. These squares, for example. So white should be winning here, but actually it's not completely clear. Maybe black has some chances to hold because of the material advantage they have. Remember here, black is up an exchange and 2 pawns. Well, they have an exchange and 2 pawns for 2 minor pieces. So they're technically up material, especially because they're 2 knights and not 2 bishops. By the way, after f4, the better move is knight c2, forking these 2 thingamajigs. But now knight takes b7, simply picking up the pawn. a5, trying to get the rook out. Now you move here. No need to recapture, yeah, like here you don't need to capture just yet because the rooks haven't moved. But after a5 and one of the rooks move, you have to capture. So you take, and now try to sacrifice in the same way. And here, after bishop takes, and knight d6, again white should have an advantage, but or should be winning. But maybe it could end in a draw if black plays very precisely. Maybe objectively it's a draw, but it's difficult to say. So queen f3 would have been a very nice way to gain an advantage, but you have to see all of these complications, especially this line with f4. Seeing that this bishop is like completely trapped, it's not so easy. I wouldn't say it's impossible though, because the whole idea is to just trap this b8 bishop and make sure the a8 rook is not in the game. so it's not impossible. So now queen d3, knight f5. We mentioned why bishop f5 maybe isn't so great. Rook a d1, protecting the d4 square because it was doubly attacked. g6, and now rook d2. Now rook d2 perhaps wasn't the best, because again bishop h3, just making this bishop active, because here it's not really doing anything. Now you might want to play some of these sacrifices, but they don't work in this specific position as they did in that other one where we played king h8, if you guys remember. Here though you start x-raying this bishop and making the knight's life a bit tougher. Instead, rook d2, king g7, preparing some kind of kingside attack. It's an interesting move. Knight d1, rook h8, all very natural. And now knight e3, protecting the very crucial squares on the king side. Takes. Actually, f takes g3 was very interesting because you can just play knight f1 and everything is safe. There may be sacrifices starting with this, but through all these complications, white emerges just fine. So f takes g3 was an interesting move. You have to see, of course, though, what happens like after f takes g3. Like you have to see precisely that this works. So not easy at all. So h takes g3, fine though still, and queen g5. There was the potential though to complicate matters with knight h4, and here of course you don't take because you just allow so many of these ideas. So here white remains better, but here you just play f4, simply closing down the king side and trying to go for knight f1 to protect. Knight takes, rook takes here, and after rook h3, it's a good move because you're adding pressure with queen h4, which threatens mate. Queen h4, by the way, threatens mate after rook h1, and attacks the rook. But here, of course, white has ways to defend against that. So white should be better, but black has some counterplay chances. So knight h4 would have been interesting. Instead, queen g5, and now Mahdi blunders with f4, just opening up the position for black. Instead, just knight f1, defending all of these important squares. And here, if you notice, like if the queen comes here, no way to checkmate because the knight on f1 prevents mate and the bishop on h1 prevents mate. So knight on f8, there's no mate. Similarly, knight on f1, there's no mate. Instead, he went for f4, and here Gio counter blunders with queen h5, allowing knight takes f5, bishop takes f5, and here Mahdi simply had queen f3, and if bishop g4 harassing the queen, you just go to f2 and you're attacking b7, and there's no mate. Queen h2 check, you just move out of the way, there's nothing. Instead of queen h5, which was questionable, here Mahdi Gio should have sacrificed, and after g takes f4 played queen h4, and now there are some dangerous threats connected with knight g3 check, queen h2 check, and all of that good stuff, and knight h4. So here black is slightly better. Difficult to see, of course, like here how can you assess if white is slightly better or black is slightly better. Of course, by the way, the queen is attacking the rook. It's not so easy, I know, but you just like here when you fail to calculate, you just have to see like how dangerous it is. And as white, you wouldn't be happy here because there's no clear way to defend. While if we look at the previous position where white was better, in this position, there is a clear way to defend, and there are much reduced pieces, right? Of course, black is down a piece here. But yeah, so you can give up the piece at any moment as white to defend, and there are clearer ways to defend with less pieces, and you have the setup with rook g2 and all of that. But here in this position, after queen, like you don't have, it's not like you have bishop f1 and you have this, so you're kind of a bit looser. So the sacrifice bishop takes f4 should have been played. Instead, queen h5, knight takes f5 check, bishop takes f5, and now Mahdi blunders with queen e3. Basically just allowing a draw, or at least an equal position, or slightly better for black. Slightly better for black because there's an attack. So queen g5, interesting move by Gio, trying to open up the position. And here Mahdi should have started running for dear life with king f1. So if takes, like for example, you can just take back and try to run for dear life. Instead he blundered by taking here, and now the following sequence just wins because there's this square that's going to be doubly attacked. So queen h2 check, king here, and now the smart rook e8. Queen takes e8. Mahdi saw that it was necessary to sacrifice, though here, like if you play queen f3, white is already lost. I'm not sure what would be the simplest. Can't pick up the rook. So this, but there's this. Is this so simple? Let's check with the engine. Am I missing something easier? I'll go back to the previous position. So queen f3, bishop g4 of course can be, no, bishop g4 doesn't work. Bishop e4, bishop e4 is simple enough, yeah. I was thinking about the sacrifice though, and here it's still not clear. Bishop takes g3. Okay, yeah, because there's e3. Okay, that works. That's a nice line. I should add it. But bishop e4 doesn't work. Not because of because of strapping the queen. So you have to play this, and of course here white is just winning. So bishop takes e4 is white is winning. And let's, yeah, I'm sorry guys, I didn't actually check deeply here. Alright, so we have the annotations here. Am I right? I'm not even right about queen takes g3, that's just equal. Okay, I'll say white is slightly better because of these. Like I don't like saying equal here, it's just engine equal. White is slightly better because of the pawns, I would say. Okay, so what's the move after queen of 3? Taking, very simply. Bishop check. And why is this winning? Still don't really get it. Okay. Yeah, so it's not something completely clear. Like, okay, of course Gio saw some of these lines. Probably this exact line he saw. But yeah, it's not something immediate. It's just that the king is like 2 bishops, bye bye. So yeah, I thought there was something more direct. Okay, so Mahdi saw it fit to sacrifice the queen, and here, by the way, you're not winning the rook because of this, just to be clear. So this happened and he sacrificed the queen, but there are just no chances here. He couldn't take, of course, because of this. So let's annotate this as a nice move, good move. And we'll go through the rest quickly. Gio picks up the knight. And yeah, these pawns will fall. It's just not enough. And Mahdi resigned. So very nice counter punch by Gio. Like the way he survived that position in the middle game with the bad bishop on b8. And the rook on a8, like it almost looked trapped, and he played really well to escape that. So congrats to him. And I noticed that it's the second game and we're already 43 minutes in. Yeah, sorry guys, this was just so many complicated games. Let's go for yeah, so just to finish off, so congrats to Gio, very nicely played to come back from that, and tough luck for Mahdi, who was playing quite well at some point, but lost the thread of the game. Okay, so so Faisal against Antoine saw an interesting move order, knight f3, g6, e4, transposing to the hyper-accelerated dragon. c5, well, it's not a dragon yet, it's still the modern, but now it transposes to the hyper-accelerated. And Faisal goes for c3, d5, so some Alapinish setup. E takes d5. E5 is interesting here, but okay. e takes d5, queen takes d5, d4, bishop g7, all very natural. And now I like knight bd2, kind of sacrificing the pawn, but not really, because you have bishop c4, queen b3, and you can castle quickly. The pawn shouldn't really be captured in that line. But instead, Faisal went for bishop e3, which is also fine. Knight f6, c4, queen d8, and already here this is a very novel position, never played before in master games, I believe. d5, and now knight e4. Going for these ideas, but perhaps better was to simply attack the b pawn this way, and we'll see why in a second. Knight e4, now you have knight bd2, smart move by Faisal. Of course, if you take here, what do you play? This, and after this you play this, and of course the two minor pieces are much better than the rook. So queen a5, bishop d3. Queen a5 wasn't the most accurate because it's really helping white develop with bishop d3. Instead, knight d6, and here you at least can relocate the knight later to f5, and it's a nice blockading square against this pawn, which isn't really a passed pawn, but you know. So queen a5, bishop d3, knight takes, bishop takes, smart to win a tempo against the queen. It's important in this position. Queen b6, and now Faisal plays too conservatively by playing rook b1. Instead, he could have just castled. The reason is that after queen takes b2, you have bishop g5 followed by rook e1, and you're doing quite fine. And you always have rook b1 ideas, so you're never really in any problems. So for example, if bishop f6, you have rook b1, making sure the queen has no squares along this diagonal, so if it goes here, go here. And then you can open up the position, and the king will have to go here, and this isn't so optimal. So that's one line. So queen takes b2 isn't really possible, and bishop takes b2 just loses on the spot after rook b1 and queen c2, and bye-bye. Well, bye-bye, but yeah, that's because of this pin. So castles immediately was possible, no need to commit this rook to b1 and not castle and slow down your development. After castles, after here queen c6 castles, black should just castle, and after rook e1 you have some nice pressure, and white is doing well. Instead he went for rook b1, castles, castles, knight a6. Now by the way, I want to mention something, that this game, as well as the next game we'll see, which will be Joe against Akram, was super high level. Many of the moves were very good. There were some improvements along the way, of course, if you ask the engine, but like the entire game had a nice thread, a nice logic to it. So not a they were both tense struggles though, but like something very logical and pure, because the caliber of the players is just from another world. Yeah, so a3 here, preventing knight b4, but I don't like this weakening move here. Just rook e1 again, counteracting was better, and the rook like always belongs on e1 in these positions. Where else would it go? So very natural. Here a3 is a bit too committal. I get that b4 is a possibility, but yeah. Queen d6 is another blunder, because it allows, well, not really a blunder, it's a mistake, because it allows some not tricks, but it allows some pressure from white. Here instead e6, opening up the position for this light squared bishop, should have been tried. Very natural move as well. Instead here queen d6, and now knight g5, a good move, trying to go for knight c5. But also there was queen c1, trying to go for bishop f4, and I would much prefer that than committing the knight to g5. e6, good move, knight here, good move, queen d7, good move. So as I told you guys, just a very high caliber game. Queen f3, threatening a knight f6 check, that's prevented. Knight g5, threatening some of this stuff. So e5 prevents d takes or knight takes. And now queen h3, threatening mate. That's parried by playing bishop f6. No need to create any weaknesses. And the knight comes into e6. Now here perhaps there was the possibility to go for a brilliant pawn sacrifice, just opening up for the e4 point. So after f takes, you go queen g2, and you have knight e4, you have bishop e2, you have f4, which is, you might think there's en passant after f4, and we'll see this in the game. Keep that in mind, that en passant isn't so great after f4. And you have b4 kinds of ideas, which is one of the main points of a3, which we saw previously. So g4 would have been a brilliant move here, but he went for knight e6, which is still fine and good. Rook e8. So here white has a slight, from between a slight and a big advantage. So somewhere in between, a reasonable edge. But now comes the basically blunderful bishop c3. I get that he wants to put pressure here, but we'll see why this isn't so great. Here better was simply rook f e1. Again, best square for the rook, why not? Or bishop g5, trying to trade off this bishop to be able to weaken black's king side because of the dark squared weaknesses, and just get the knight to g5 where it has some nice squares to go to. Note of course that the tactic doesn't work because of seemingly this, but of course you just win the queen here, so that doesn't work. Instead he went for bishop c3, which kind of misplaces the bishop, and we'll see why. Because now, after queen d6, your knight is attacked and you don't have any way back. So the bishop was doing a crucial job here. g4 though was the only way to, and of course Faisal saw that, that's why he played this, but he should have played it before. Takes, 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 and queen e3. Of course you can't take here because you lose the bishop, so queen e3, queen takes e6, bishop e4, and now the queen went to e7. Of course here I don't get why this wasn't tried. Maybe he was fearing bishop takes b7, but you just go here, and the queen is defending a6, so that's not a problem. Rook fd1, and this position should be about equal. White is of course down 2 pawns, but the bishop pair is very strong, especially this light squared bishop, and it's not like these pawns are so great. So white should be actually I'll say here that white is slightly better instead of completely equal. Okay, it's a kind of dynamic equality. But here instead Faisal, Antoine played queen e7. Now just going back, so that's why bishop c3 isn't so great, because of this long forcing line. Of course I understand why, like Faisal definitely knew that there was no going back with knight g5, so he definitely saw queen d6 and calculated all of this line, but maybe at the end of this line he didn't see that after queen takes c4 he's down too much in terms of material. Now surprisingly Antoine doesn't want to go for that, which is surprising because, like, what's the alternative? Like here you have the same position but you're not winning the c4 pawn, so I don't get that. And here actually queen e7 even allows a very nice tactic with f4. Not really a tactic, but like a positionally motivated or an aggressively motivated tactic. Yeah, he played queen g3 instead, which is very lukewarm here, just attacks the g4 pawn. Should give white a reasonable advantage because you have bishop d5. Sometimes bishop takes b7, of course now it's not possible, and sometimes queen takes g4. So yeah, queen g3 isn't so bad, but here f4 was just really on point. The point being, after g takes f3, queen takes f3, you're attacking 2 important squares. Note now that taking on b7 is possible, only 1 defender and 2 attackers. While after f4, if en passant, and remember, actually no, this is the en passant capture. Yeah, so remember what I said about en passant, but what happens if e takes, which seems very natural. Now simply rook takes, and you're threatening bishop d5, bishop d5 check, you're threatening bishop takes f6, you're threatening rook takes f6, you're threatening rook takes g4, and these are too many threats for black to parry. Black can play bishop takes c3, but then comes bishop d5 check, king moves on to h8, and then queen takes check, for example queen g7, and white should have an advantage on that position. No need to analyze too deeply here. Instead, after f4, probably the best move is knight c7, bringing this wayward knight, this knight on a6, back to the game. But now, after f5, blocking all of these shenanigans, making sure these pieces Like when you might be afraid of playing f4 because of exactly this, and now all of these pieces come into play. But again, it fails due to tactical reasons. So after knight c7, here you can't allow taking anymore, which would open up all of these three pieces. So we play f5, and you get very strong attack on the right squares as well. Note that black doesn't have a right squared bishop, and bishop takes b7 can be played at any point to recover a pawn, but that's not what we're after. We're after this boy. So queen e7, queen g3, rook a d8. All of these moves are fine. Knight c7, getting the knight back, b4, in line with the a3, king g7, improving the placement of the king, getting out of some checks. And now comes h4, which is a very optimistic move. Or yeah, maybe like yeah, maybe a bit afraid of what would happen if white doesn't play in enterprising fashion. So that's smart by Faisal, like keeping the initiative going, because he's afraid like he might be losing in some of these positions. But it wasn't really warranted, and we'll see why. Because after bishop c6, you threaten rook d7, which would liquidate in most positions, because after rook d7 takes, and you're attacking this rook, so this is a nice move to play. Instead, he played h4, knight e6. Now you might be wondering why it can't be captured, and I think there are two ways to go about this. Right? You start with bishop c6. Of course, this is the immediate obvious response. Yeah, this works. Point is this, and all of this is forced. So I think that's basically the reason. The engine suggests bishop takes e5. The c5. Ah, this loses? What? Oh. Ah, this works. Ah, so I'm not sure. Yeah, and now you're losing due to the pin. Alright, alright. Yeah, so my assumption was wrong here. Another egg on my face moment. You guys will have to forgive me here. So actually bishop takes h4. It's a dubious move, white is slightly better. Bishop takes is a blunder, black is winning. So instead you have to take and go rook b1. Yeah, so I misjudged here. Apparently Faisal's point by playing h4 and like if bishop h4, he wanted to do something like this. I'm pretty sure that was his point. I'm not sure he wanted to play this and rook b1, like rook b1 is strange. It makes sense of course when you see it because of the engine, but yeah, so I think that was Faisal's point, or he blundered like I did and thought this would be winning. But I don't think both players blundered, though they're on move 30, so maybe they were both in time pressure, and Antoine trusted the Faisal's calculations, and Faisal thought, yeah, but no, these players are too strong. I would assume Faisal thought he would play king g2, rook h1 ideas, so sacrificing the pawn for initiative. Probably. Okay, knight e6 instead, which is a much better move, of course. Trying to get the knight to better squares, greener pastures, h5, adding pressure. The knight comes to f4 where it defends g6 quite importantly, and now bishop b takes c5. Very strange move by Faisal. Bishop d2 just attacking the knight, or even the more natural rook fe1, which is something that needed to be played way before. The reason b takes c5 is so strange is because simply after queen takes c5 you're just activating the queen, so I didn't really get that. And here you still had a shot to play bishop d2, trying to take here so that you can play bishop d5. Of course in some lines queen the a3 pawn would be hanging, but you also have this usually, and it's not usually such a big problem. Instead he played bishop b4, and now Antoine again didn't take the bait, which is like this game is all about not taking the bait actually. So after queen takes c4 here, just taking the free pawn, rook d7, king h6, and there's nothing here thanks to this knight. So there's nothing here. So black is actually completely winning here. Too many pawns. This bishop is getting is in an annoying spot, and this is happening. And yeah, so this should be quite good for black. Instead, he just played queen c8 and didn't take the bait. So if you notice, guys, it's all about not taking the bait. And I think I have myself a video title. So here you notice, didn't take c4, and here didn't take h4, and here didn't take c4. So it's all about not taking the bait. Okay, but now queen c8, and this is just a liquidation into a basically equal endgame. Too many pawns get liquidated. White has the bishop pair to compensate for the last pawn, but it's not enough, and it ends up being an opposite color bishop endgame. Not really much to talk about for the last moves after queen takes c8. It's just equal. So queen c8 was questionable. Queen c4 and queen takes c4 instead would have kept an advantage. So it was all basically not about taking the bait. But okay, this was a super high level game, very deep, and yeah, I mean very few mistakes actually. Okay, next up we have another high level game, quite similar to this one. Yeah, so Joe against Akram. Joe winning a big game. You guys might remember all of their wars on this channel. The Akram 1000 IQ against Joe Assaad. Wow, those were the days. Yeah, much better days. Yeah, so let's check out the game. They play the Khan. Akram goes for the Khan, and Joe assays a normal line. Like this is quite a good line to get an advantage. And here Akram goes a bit astray by playing b5, which is a very natural move, but inserting the necessary pawn push first with d6 was a bit better. b5 is still fine, of course. And here Joe plays in enterprising fashion, as is usual with him. He's a very aggressive player. But sometimes he does play Kassis queenside and the Sicilian, especially against Khan structures. But here he saw the opportunity and just castled queenside. I love it. b4, all of these moves are good. All of these moves are good and natural. That's why I don't really have much to say. Like white is going for a queenside expansion plan. Black goes for the kingside expansion. What is going? Black goes for the queenside expansion. Bishop d7, developing. Knight b6, putting a knight on a strong square and maybe trading off the bishop, maybe going here. Rook d8 now is a bit questionable because you really allow knight takes d7, where white gets rid of this important bishop and has some other ideas in mind, which we'll explain in a minute. Bishop e8, I know you kind of like make the rook stuck, you kind of trap your own rook, but you have some reasons for doing that. You can kick away the knight eventually with knight c8, and then slowly go about getting the rook back to greener pastures. Instead, rook d8. Rook d8. Knight takes d7. Rook takes d7. And now this plan comes into fruition. I know a lot of arrows are there. So basically, the main plan is playing f5, ceding control over. So pushing f5 here, ceding control of the e5 square, but that's fine because you'll follow up with h4, h5, h6, and get a really nasty thorn pawn in that black king side. And if after h6, g6, you start opening up with h6, with f takes g6. And in many positions, f6 and g5, g6 are possible, so I thought I'd include that. King b1, it's a very natural Sicilian move, but it kind of just allows white's black's pawn pushes. Instead, here you had the opportunity, instead of king b1, just to start off with f5 and go for your own attack. But I can understand why Joe maybe feared a5, a4, knight a3, a3. which would also similarly to white's plan of playing h4, h5, h6, creating a thorn pawn. Also here you would create a thorn pawn which would force after like knight a3, like so. After let's say a5 here, you go h4, so h5, h4, you go a4, knight a3, then a3, b3. This would force the weakening of the queen side, but there were of course ways to play against that. Maybe knight d2, maybe knight a3 first, after a5 maybe just pushing through and not minding that position. Though I can understand why Joe played king b1 here, because after a5 he wanted to meet here with bishop b5 and play this. Very smart decision by Joe, so I don't really blame him, but it wasn't accurate from the technical standpoint. So here takes, and Joe doesn't further liquidate because he'd lose the queen. So taking here would lose the queen, so he plays rook d3. Nice move, defending against all of these pawn pushes, or at least mitigating their effects and defending the queen. Knight a5, trying to go for knight c4 nasties with knight a3 nasties. Knight f5, trying to trade. Note that takes would be met by takes, so queen d8 here is played, and this turns out to be a blunder because of a trick. Instead, queen c5 would have kept the game balanced. Probably I'd start favoring black, because here it's not so easy to see what white can do. Probably should retreat, and if takes, you just really help black. Instead, queen d8, and now comes knight takes d6. Very nice tactic. The point being, after rook takes d6, this is g to the g. You're up in exchange with mating threats, with very weak pawns. White is completely winning. So after knight takes d6, you shouldn't take on d6. You just play b3, trying to go for counterplay. And here Joe, instead of taking and being obliging to the opening up of the queen side, he could have tried rook h d1, adding pressure along this file. After b takes e2, just taking, and then just hiding back on b3. And here, due to these pieces, white is actually able to defend, and also especially this knight is doing a good job. So white should be much better here, or better at least. After c takes b3, he kind of gives up the advantage, because after a takes b3, he takes here, trying, okay, to argue that he's up 2 pawns. But of course, with this position being so open, black shouldn't be that worse off. Like, the 2 pawns do count for something, but black has a big initiative. But very gutsy move by Joe, and like shows how confident he is in his calculations. Instead here, just keeping the position relatively close by playing rook c1, threatening rook c8, of course, picking up the queen. So here after bishop takes a2, you're also confident that knight b3 check will never be a thing, because you're very well defended. Even if rook takes d6, for example, knight b3 check would be made, but even if rook takes d6, you have queen takes d6. Okay. If rook takes d6, you have rook takes d6, and after queen takes d6, your queen is still defending here, and you can even take here, because then this check can just be met by this. Knight check, you go here, and you shouldn't be losing. Even after queen d3, you just take the knight and you should be okay. Let's actually run this line through the engine. So if rook takes, you can take. Rook c8 first is much easier, of course. This would be losing. Okay, so guys, my analysis today is just terrible. Yeah. Oh, this would even be a draw. I thought white's queen would allow the perpetual not to occur, but not the case. But actually, after knight d3, you're just up a minor piece. Yeah, so okay. My excuse is that when you're commentating, you're like, I'm just taking 2 seconds to see these lines. So yeah, that's my excuse. So these are complicated lines, so don't blame me. Instead here, of course, you go rook c8 check. Just because of the back rank mate, black is forced to give up the queen. Even you lose the rook here, and it's GG. So rook c8 ends the game. So white is winning. and this. Black is winning. So rook takes, so here rook a c7, white is slightly better, and if rook takes d6, white is winning. Okay, sorry for that, guys. This is the third blunder of this video and expect more to come. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, when you do commentary you'll understand. Okay, so a takes b3. Yeah, so I liked rook c1 instead, but a takes b3, very gutsy move, can't blame Joe. e5, yeah, like I don't blame Joe. I think he probably calculated till here and like saw this, like he wasn't liking this. Maybe he actually saw this line and like, okay, but Joe is a really good calculator, but maybe in time pressure he didn't see. Okay, anyway, a takes b3, though like a takes b3 isn't like wrong or anything. So rook a6, adding pressure to this guy. e5 is forced. I'm thinking if it's forced. No, yeah, rook hd1 doesn't work, right? So queen a8, seemingly a good move, adding pressure, threatening mate, threatening the rook, but there is actually a trick here. Knight c6 would have been much better, preparing all of this good stuff. Instead he went here. Now comes rook c1, and you're threatening winning this, the queen. So knight c6 is played. Now this is threatened, but white doesn't care and plays rook c4. Very good move, preventing knight b4 check. Here, of course, if you play some random move. I was thinking, yeah, it's rook check first, then knight b4, and this would be losing. I was thinking about also after g5, I was thinking about knight b4, trying to threaten mate, blocking the escape square, but hello. And yeah, no mate is okay, yeah, even this mate isn't threatened. Of course you have this, but yeah, there's just this. So yeah, some of these lines. So rook c4, just getting allowing the king to come out. Knight e7 here, and this turns out to be a slight inaccurate or a mistake. And here we have rook c7, which is a very brilliant move. The point is a very nice tactical trick, and you can see that after the, like for example h3. The point here is that there's knight b4 and mate is threatened, and you can't do anything about that really. Also the rook is threatened, so if you like go here, there's just this. So this would win the game. So yeah. And if knight e7, which is what happened in the game, this turns out to be not so accurate because there's queen f3 trying to trade off the queens and go into just a better endgame, maybe even winning. Instead he went for queen e4, and this basically causes a draw. And here we have this. Rook d1 takes. Okay, let's go slowly. So you check. You go here, trying to threaten this. So rook d1 is played to defend, takes. But now these are hanging. Of course, you take the one with check. So queen takes b3 check. And now king c1 would kind of be equal. White is up a pawn. White is up a pawn, but it doesn't really matter. Black has too much activity. There will be perpetuals on the way. But instead, Joe tries to play on by playing queen c2, which allows queen f3 check, picking up this pawn. Queen e2, though, Joe sees that this works for him, so black isn't actually picking up the pawn. But the problem arises later after queen h1, king c2, and now here, for example, rook d8. Rook a7 is the blunder of the game. Rook d8, and yeah, this shows that like black is way too active. Like white is never winning this position. They're never promoting the pawn. But I would have been interested to see how Joe might have won this position or might have lost, maybe too risky. Yeah, instead he went for Akram went for rook a7, and now Joe finds the trick, knight c8, and it's GG, forking these two pieces. if you go somewhere with the rook, check, check, takes, and check is leading to mate after rook e8. So he went rook a1 trying to create counterplay here, but now this comes with check. King f8, of course you can't go back even if you wanted to because rook c8 is mate. And now just knight comes here and everything is protected. These squares might seem might seem scary, but you just go up and you have no problems. The rook is doing a good job defending a4 after king b3, and the knight is doing a nice job defending other squares. It's all good. The queen is also defending d1, all good. He tried king g6, but now Joe goes even forcefully to b3 because he sees that's completely safe, and now tries to trade off the rooks and just wins with the extra knight. And here Akram resigned. So very tough loss for Akram, a very high level game, very high level, but whoops, it was not meant to be. Okay, I need to speed up, it's already been way too long. So we have Maasarani against Tarek, the 5th game. Yeah, this was also a very long and complicated game. Okay, so let's start. c4, e5, d3, g3. Okay, we got this reverse Grand Prix, which we've seen a lot in this tournament actually. And now knight c3 isn't so accurate because it just allows b4. Here you can stop bishop b4, I meant, by playing a3. Okay, but knight c3, bishop b4, bishop d2, d6. Okay, all of this is quite normal. White gets the bishop pair, but black gets attacking chances, which is Tarek's bread and butter. And here, after c5, white had the chance to play queen b3 check, and this c5 is a good move because in some positions you take on d6 and just get a nice central queenside pressure. And if black takes, of course, this is just weakening the pawn structure and just giving up a pawn, of course, like here you just take back. So this would have been good. Instead he went for e3, basically inviting f4 because this pawn sacrifice definitely you don't really want to accept. Though in some positions it turns out that accepting is the best move, but okay. And here he goes for knight e1, which promises a certain defense, which we will see actually. I can show you. So he played this. This was his defensive idea, but this turns out to be just too weak. This is just too weak of a pawn structure, and black is much better here. Instead, white could have tried e takes f4, seemingly going into black's attack, but after bishop g4, the best move, you play rook e1. Now you're threatening some stuff like taking, and you actually have a reasonable position. If takes, actually, you can take and take here, and usually they take with the g-pawn, but even if they take with the rook, you have enough defensive resources and you can weather the storm most likely. But a lot of complications ensue, and black is much better. No, black is slightly better, but yeah, in practice black is much better because these are very difficult positions to defend. So again, all of this could have been avoided by playing c5, counteracting the kingside pressure with queenside pressure. But anyway, this was not played. Let's mention something. After e takes f4, bishop h3 would be wrong, because of knight g5, forcing either the queen. If the queen retreats, the bishop is lost, and if the bishop takes, you're able to trade queens. So knight g5 is a nice tactic to keep, or idea to keep in mind. And here, this position, knight e6, trying to win back the pawn at least, and going for rook e1, trying to take c7. So this should be about a bit better for white. Too much better, like reasonably better. Instead he went for knight e1, which is a bit problematic because this line, as we have seen, weakens too many squares. Here actually the engine recommends bishop d7 because of very long lines where it turns out like d4, d5 can be annoying if the bishop is on e6, but bishop e6 is a very human move and completely fine in my book. Knight c2, protecting this weak square and hinting at or at least overprotecting d4. And now comes knight e7, relocating this knight to the g6 square. If you notice, kind of reminiscent of the game Gio played against Mahdi, because in that game as well, Gio played knight e7 and didn't turn out to be so great actually in that position. So something to keep in mind. Also, in like the first time Gio played it, it wasn't great in the opening, and the second time he played knight e7, it was actually a mistake. Like knight e7 in the opening was an inaccuracy in that Gio game, and when he played the knight from g6, he put it on e7 instead of on f4. It was a mistake. So yeah, just a reminder if you guys follow that. Okay, so knight e7. It's not so great because there is a better move, which is just queen g6, attacking these sensitive points. So knight e7 is not wrong in principle, just relocating the knight to greener pastures where it aids in the kingside attack, but there was something more direct. Here e4 could have been tried to at least cement this pawn center and start to give more squares for white to defend or gain control over, gain access to. Instead he played bishop e1, which is a bit passive. c5 now. Just also controlling the center and kind of discouraging d4, though always d4 is meant by bishop takes c4, so keep that in mind. Rook b1, preparing b4, and now comes e4. So that's why it was also important to play e4 yourself. At least you don't allow white this sacrificial idea. Now the point of e4 was that if takes, you have knight g4 and hello, and if you take like this, there's this. But turns out after d takes e4, bishop takes c4, rook f2, white is doing just fine because of this. So rook a d8 here, defending d6, rook d2, attacking d6, bishop b3, rook c1, overprotecting c2, and now comes queen e5, which was actually a mistake. By the way, here instead of e4, which seemed very tempting and nice but turns out not to be so great after the line we saw, there was just rook f7, rook f8, and piling up pressure as such. Maybe knight d7 and just like really going to town on that pawn, with perhaps e4 at some point. Instead, e4 and this line, and here he went for queen e5. The much more natural knight c6 going for this square was better, because queen e5 actually runs into a tempo after f4, and if queen e6, let's say, there's e5 and all of this good stuff, you can't take on d6 because then the rook would take on d8 and white would win material. After rook takes d8, there's queen takes d8 check, and now here the knight is attacked and the bishop is attacking b7, and this pawn can also capture on d6 and the rook can capture on d6. So all of that looks very nice for white. And if instead after f4, not queen e6 but the other square, if black tries to go for h5, if black goes for h5, then you can just trade queens, push here, push here. I know you're giving the knight the square again, so you'd think here like you wouldn't want to give the knight the square, but no, you're fine with giving it the square, but here you just argue that you have a lot of space. And you can relocate your bishop, of course this is covered now, but yeah, and you have many potential ideas, something like this as well, this, or knight from here. All of these moves are ideas, but f4 would have been much better. Instead he counter blundered by playing rook b1, and now black is just fine and a bit better. Knight c6, the move we want to see previously. Queen e2, natural development. Knight c6, of course. Queen e2, getting out of the spin, natural. And now comes knight a5, which just blunders something because of this, and we'll see why in a second. Instead, the more natural b6, just solidifying the queen side. Queen e7, just getting out of the way, or queen e6, both getting out of the way. Trying to prepare some ideas to go back at some point. Or like, yeah, just getting the queen away from f4. All of these were possible. Knight a5 is not met by knight a1, which isn't that great actually. It's another counter blunder. Instead here rook d3 would have been very good. The point being that if bishop takes, so rook d3, The point being, if bishop takes c2, queen takes c2, you just enjoy a really nice position with the bishop pair. And if rook d3, knight c6, just removing the attacked piece, you just take win the piece, of course. The knight was protecting the bishop. And if rook d3, bishop c4, which is the natural counter pin, here you just pick up the knight, and after this, after bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, you're up 2 pieces for the exchange and aren't even down a pawn, so this is completely winning. Also, there's the bishop pair, so this adds in value. So of course, material-wise, you're completely winning. And if rook d3, the best move, c4 is played, you just play rook c3, and now you have knight d4 and can start harassing this bishop. And if the knight remains here, you can then move the rook after knight d4, rook c1, and take on a3. Instead, knight a1 here, bishop c4. So knight a1 is just like a tragic move to play. You'd really want to avoid it, even though it's not so bad here. Like, white isn't losing or anything, but yeah, just better to avoid it. And here Tarek kind of goes for a weird draw, though I know he doesn't want a draw, and this double clicking mouse is kind of getting annoying. So knight a1, here, bishop a2. Here bishop f7 was much more natural, trying to relocate on the king's side. Instead bishop a2, rook c1, and now to like instead of playing bishop f7, which again was much more natural, he played knight c4, which really just traps this bishop, and we'll see how black basically loses because of that. Here comes rook e2, which is a counter blunder because you don't play it under better circumstances. So rook e2 is just a natural move and allows like d5, which is a good move. Instead, he should have, whoops, yeah, this is getting annoying. So after knight c4, f4 was the way to go, kicking the queen away, and now comes rook e2. And here you have b3 as a threat and rook takes a2. So if knight takes e4, no, not if so. As an aside, if knight takes e4, queen d5 check picks up the knight. And if knight g4, oh god, if knight g4, trying to go for this square, here comes check, king h8, and now you could refrain from taking here and play for the long hold, like for example with b3 or something like that, but more enterprising and fun and clear is taking, allowing this b5 to just try to win the rook outright, because you don't want to take again, as we have seen. That's completely winning, 2 minor pieces against the rook, so b5. But now comes the counter punch here, and you think taking is also attacking this, but after you take, it's a very nice geometrical sequence. You're defending this rook, so takes here, and you're very happy here. So takes, and here you have 3 minor pieces against 2 rooks, but look at what's happened. You have the bishop pair, and the bishop pair is way stronger than the 2 rooks here because they have such good squares. For example here, and the knight will be able to go to these squares. So this is just actually better for white. Very difficult line though, of course, but like if you get to this position, like if you give me this position, tell me who's better, I'd take white all day. I get it's difficult for perhaps lower rated players to see, but just trust in the power of the bishop pair. So rook e2 here instead without playing f4, and now comes d5, and now black is the one controlling the flow of the game instead of white. b3 trying to trap the knight, the bishop, so maybe that was Maasarani's plan, but it doesn't really work out, because after queen c2 here comes e takes f3, and this is what should have been played, but he didn't see that, Tarek, or didn't play it for some reason. And now here in this position, after double clicking, e takes f3, taking the piece, and you take another piece, so seemingly you just won 2 pieces here, but you black wins a piece back. And notice that the extra piece isn't really doing anything, and black has a lot of threats on these these squares I've highlighted, and has rook f1 check as a threat. Not necessarily in this position, but in some other positions. So this is completely fine for black. White is slightly better, but not more, even though he's up a piece, but okay, it's in a1 knight. But instead he went for knight d6 here, not taking on f3, probably seeing that line and seeing a wrinkle he didn't like or whatever. Now comes f4, finally playing f4, queen h5, queen h5. Oh god, what's wrong with this mouse? Queen h5, queen takes a2, okay. So white is up a piece here, knight g4 though, trying to create counterplay, but now and now white blunders with queen c2, which doesn't really offer white good chances. Instead bishop f1 defending here, or b4 check would have been winning, because after c4 takes, this stuff is winning. Again you have the bishop pair against the rook, completely winning, and also this extra pawn. So b4 check would have been nice. Instead queen c2. Now white is of course still better here. Nothing severe has happened, but the defense now becomes almost impossible for a human being. Here Tarek kind of counter blunders by playing knight f5, which gives white an easier win. Instead, after queen h2, it's maybe not even winning at all for white. Queen h2 check. Actually, after queen c2 I should just give it an equal sign, because there's queen h2. And now with king f1, here comes knight f5, and this is threatened, so you have to take here. And after so I don't know what's wrong. So queen takes e4, knight takes check, takes and takes, and now knight c2 defends e3, and after king h8, getting out of the long diagonal, getting out of queen c4 checks. Knight h2 check is coming in many positions, rook takes f4 in some positions, so white should have g5 in some position, so black should be about drawing this. And they have an extra, okay, one pawn for the piece, but yeah, with all of these threats it should be enough for a draw. Note by the way in this line that after queen f3, knight h2 is simply winning the queen. So don't blunder that. Here instead you have to protect e3 by playing knight c2. I'd never play queen f3 when knight h2 check is available. Instead Tarek didn't find queen h2 check, or of course he would have found, like he's seen that, but he didn't think it was that good. So he played knight f5 instead. But here comes, or should have come, queen h2 check with, I mean bishop takes e4, with a nice position for white, because now you're defending against this, attacking this, trying to liquidate more pieces, remove more pieces off the board, threatening this. All of this would have been like basically winning here. I don't see much counterplay. Instead, I wonder what Tarek would have played against bishop takes e4. Instead, queen takes c5, and now comes queen h2 check, king f1, and here black had rook d2 with basically very nasty threats, and yeah, black would have been better. Instead he blundered with rook d5, which is shocking, because after queen takes d5, GG. But he probably thought that queen takes d5 didn't come with check, so he thought he had the fork here. Or maybe he even thought after king h8 he had the fork and all of these threats, and and he thought like this was, there was no way of stopping this. But apart from queen takes f5, which is what Maasarani played, and Tarek resigned here because of the back rank mate. Let me just show you. This didn't happen, of course, but Tarek obviously resigned here. But yeah, but apart from queen takes f5, which immediately wins, there's also just bishop f2, and there's no fork. So I don't get why he was actually yeah, there's no fork because it's defended twice. So maybe he thought it was like defended once. Like, I don't know what happened there, but yeah, he just lost after rook d5, queen takes d5 check, and the check is important as well, like even adds to black's misery. But here he had one way forward, which was to play rook d2, very smart move. Let's check the obvious captures, which both lose. If bishop takes d2, there's knight check, you move here, check, and it's mate. All of this is forced. And if rook takes d2, also there's basically a forced mating sequence if you go wrong. You have to give up the queen. And here if queen takes, you can take here and you'd actually be even better. But after knight takes g2, you're just lost. Yeah, so wait, what did I want to say? Yeah, here you'd just be lost, but there's actually a mate after king e2, because now check comes. You can't go to any of these squares because of the knight and the pawn, so you have to block like this, and it's GG. So both bishop takes d2 and rook takes d2 can't be played, so the rook is untouchable. So you have to defend e3 as we've seen previously with knight c2. But now rook takes e2, queen c4 check is important so that you don't take with the king and lose. King h8, king h8, queen takes e2. But now comes knight takes g3, knight takes g3, bishop takes g3, queen takes g3. And here in this position, knight e1, defending some crucial squares. And now comes defending f3, of course, because there's, like for example, if you play whatever here, there's just this. I imagine that's the point. Let's check with the engine what happens after a4. Maybe there's something more direct. Yeah, just g5 opening up the position. So knight okay, so knight e1 and g5, and here you have to see like rook c5 and all of that weird stuff, which we're not going to get into, but basically white is able to kind of survive, but black is much better. So that would have been basically the only way to defend after rook d2. But yeah, like Maasarani would have been hard pressed to defend that position. So rook d2 would have been a very brilliant way for Tarek to win. Instead, unfortunately, he blundered like right away with rook d5. Like any move but blundering like this. But yeah, tough luck for Tarek. This was a super topsy-turvy game, so complicated. Like I don't know what happened here. Yeah, so I would have preferred if it would have ended in draw actually, but yeah, I didn't. Okay, so very long video, the longest yet. I knew it would be long because the analysis actually usually it takes me 1 hour to analyze all of these games, like with these 5 games, and usually I have some idea, so that's so I can reduce the time a bit to 1 hour exactly. But here I even had some idea of the games even more than usual, and it still took 2.5 hours. So way too complicated these games in round 8. Thankfully for you guys maybe, or maybe you want more content, round 9 is much shorter, of course, for obvious reasons. But now let's check the standings, and I put them up since you guys, I was all the time just calculating them. So I put them up on in LibreOffice. So let me change the window capture. Where is it? What's it called? Untitled 2. Yeah, here it is. So sorry guys, so here we have the standings after round 8. So you can see Amr leading but not clinching the title because both Gio and Joe are right behind, though Amr has better tie breaks than Joe, so realistically it's only Gio who can catch him, and they face each other in the 9th round. I already know the result because I moved from the future. No, yeah. Well, kind of. But yeah, so you'll have to see what happened in round 9. And there are a lot of players on 5.5. Ralph, very impressive performance. Faisal, Antoine, definitely disappointing for them. 2 ex-champions, multiple times champions. multiple time champions. And Mahmoud, actually a reasonable performance, 5.5. Mahdi, reasonable. Samir and Adib, the young guns, quite nice, but probably they're ambitious and want more, but it's quite good for them. So yeah, that's it for this video. It's way too long, guys. So let me actually change also the scene back so I don't have to do it again. To this and fix this stuff. Yeah. So that's it for this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and watch out for round 9, where there will be a fierce battle to find out who is the Lebanese chess champion. Gio, the up and coming young player who's done phenomenally well in this tournament, crazy performance, definitely underrated. And Amr, the stronghold of Lebanese chess, who will be the winner, who will be victorious. Alright, with that, take care, guys. Bye.